So let's start with Darrell Maddox, a quick overview. Darrell got his master's in plant pathology from Colorado State University. He is currently the managing director of Endless Sky Partners, which is a consulting firm specializing in seed health management, quality management systems, accreditation systems, project management, and market development for agricultural businesses and organizations. He has a long history in the seed industry. Prior to that, he was with STA Laboratories. Before that, he had various positions with Asgrow Seed Company. So he has participated actively in industry groups and committees. At one time, he was the chairperson of the ASTA Phytosanitary Committee. He's also been on the board of directors for the California Seed Association. And he was instrumental in helping to set up the National Seed Health System through the USDA APHIS, which is the system that accredits entities to do various services that support the issuance of phytosanitary certificates. So he also provided technical expertise to the ASTA phytosanitary risk model and to the international team's efforts to harmonize seed health requirements worldwide. So Darrell, let me turn this over to you.
All right, thank you, Rick. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good.
Sounds great.
Let me get my screen shared here. All right, thank you, Rick, for the introduction, and thanks for everybody for joining this webinar. It's nice to see this many people interested in pest listing, but as we all know in the seed industry, it's very important with the movement of seed internationally. As Rick said, I'm been a consultant. I've been working with Rick and the international team for 6 or 7 years now on pest listing. And you know, the name of the pest listing project we have is Pest Database for Seeds, which you'll see abbreviated quite a lot through the program as PEDS, which is just our little acronym we came up with for the thing. So anyway, I'm going to get started. I'm going to start with a little background on why we're doing some pest listing. You know, why is it important to the seed industry? You know, how the ASTA pest list was developed, and then, you know, eventually I'll end up getting the database up and doing a few examples and letting everybody see how it all kind of works. Okay, so why are we interested in pest listing? Well, you know, the main reason has always been to address the phytosanitary barriers to trade, you know, which we all know have been disruptive, they've been costly, ended up with more field inspections that are usually necessary, more lab tests that are usually necessary, not to mention the countless hours that everybody puts into to review the literature to see if you know, a trade barrier or a pest restriction is justified or not. We also use it for promoting our science-based regulations, which is, you know, where we want to go is everything we want to be science-based. This was a way to kind of get information into, you know, 1 or 2 locations to really help kind of do that, and help with the elimination of irrelevant additional declarations. And it's mostly the technically unjustified or the ones that aren't scientifically sound. We also looked at it as a way to provide information for pest risk analysis, which are really often required by a lot of importing countries. It gave us a way to organize scientific data and research so we could help put pest risk analysis together, which we hope, you know, in the long run is with all this data in 1 or 2 databases, it'll make the allocation of resources much better. Pest listing in the seed industry is, you know, became important probably, I would say probably 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, when the seed industry really looked at it and said, hey, we really want to be a credible partner in pest management and the movement of seeds. And we want to show the world that, you know, we're really doing the best we can when determining what's seedborne and what needs to be done to prevent seedborne disease. So it gave us a way to kind of become that partner with the regulatory agencies. It also provides for a quick reference to see what else we can do if we do have a seedborne disease, are there seed treatments available? Can we do something in the field? What are some of the system approaches we can use to help with the control of some of these seedborne diseases? In the industry, there's really been 2 industry initiatives, and I'm going to just briefly mention the ISF, the International Seed Federation reference. I don't want to steal Rose's talk. She's going to talk a lot about it at the end of this program. But their program was made to kind of establish meaningful science-based relevant pest lists for vegetable crops, with the goal of facilitating the harmonization of phytosanitary requirements. And that's kind of where how they set out their goal to move their pest list forward, which is called the Regulated Pest List Database. The one I've been working on with Rick and the international team at ASTA is the PeDS. And we looked at it as providing scientific data and resources for pest risk analysis to require so we can establish scientifically sound phytosanitary requirements. Realistically, their goals have been the same. How they approached it has been a little bit different, but in the bottom line is between these 2 initiatives, they've come up with some very similar information and very harmonized information. So let me talk a little bit about how we kind of develop PeDS. When we started working on PeDS, we really focused on the World Trade Organization pest notices that came from some of the MPPOs in the primary markets for the US seed industry. And these were mostly lists that came out of Mexico, out of Brazil, Chile, China, Korea, Thailand, and somewhat Sudan and Japan. But really those first 6 are where most of the pest listing came from. In the case of PeDS, since it's the pests that are regulated, we really kind of focus this on the pest. So we really found out information about the pest and then moved it to the host. And I always call it being pest centric, but we really focused it that direction. The PeDS not only includes the vegetables like the ISF database, but we have grasses in it, forage crops in it, agronomic crops. We have more flowers being integrated into it now. We'll still have some more grasses we have to work on. Once we kind of figured out what the pest was, what the pest-host relationship was, then we started digging into what is seed a pathway, are there seed testing if it is a pathway, and what other risk mitigations are there available for each host pest combination. We've looked at references. If somebody made the claim that something was seed transmitted, we dug in and tried to find that reference, tried to verify it, tried to get some corroboration with it. And so we tried to find all that, and we weren't successful all the time, but we did our best in getting those things. We tried to make the information standardized throughout the whole database. It's transparent, that's why it's open to the public. And really, to be successful with any of these databases, and I think that ISF is true, is we have to have feedback. So we have a way to get feedback back into the PeDS database to help kind of really keep the data organized, keep the data up to date, and then review any other references that people might have. Finally, when we worked at PeDS, is like I said, we harmonized the database with the ISF regulated pest list database. But what I mean by harmonization is we use the same terminology throughout. In the PeDS database, we cite the IFS when it's appropriate, i.e. when we're doing vegetables. And the seed pathway designations are in agreement, which I'm going to go over those in just a minute. But so we worked together. This was Rose's predecessor in the pest list project. Jim Cuckoos and I worked quite close together to try to get everything harmonized the best we could between the 2 databases. Okay. So how I developed the PeDS database was, once we had a WTO notice and we had a pest that we knew may have significance to some of the U.S. seed industry, I had to find a way to kind of coordinate that information internationally. And so I would look up things like pest name, the distribution of the pests, some of the host range, and I would try to find a couple databases that would give me that information kind of quickly. And most of that came from the CABI Crop Protection Compendium. Some of it came from a description of plant viruses, USDA fungal database, GRIN fungal database we used. But that gave me the general information about the pest. What's the pest's true name? What will people recognize? What's a common name? How many other different names are there for that pest? Where is it in the world? Where is it in the U.S.? In the importing country that put the notice out, has the pest been identified there? Was another thing that we used it for. I also use that for some other information, like, has it been quarantined in some other countries? Is it, what besides potential of seed being a way it transmits, is there other ways it gets transmitted? And any other kind of epidemiological info that may have pertinence in terms of the pest risk analysis, really. So that's kind of what I use those kind of general databases for, just to get that kind of core information about the pest. Once I had all that information about the pest, I would look at what crops for the pests that are important to the seed industry, and I would list that in what we call the seed information section. And that's the section where we use references to determine what the seed pathway is, to see if there's any seed health testing described in any of the literature. Is there any other seed treatments or other mitigations that would be useful to the industry and to developing some pest risk analysis? And again, one more, just to down here, we did go through and verify all the references as best we could. Wasn't always possible. COVID made it a little bit difficult because we couldn't get into the libraries and things like that. But we found a lot of databases and articles that we could use that would either verify some information or dispute some information. I said I'd come back to this. One of the I wouldn't say the most difficult, but one of the more debatable pieces of the database that we had to come up with, and this was really important. At least Jim Cucuz and myself thought was to get these designations and definitions for seed as a pathway really harmonized between ours and the ISF database. And we spent countless hours on the phone trying to figure this out and whatever. But it really came down to is that there was some feedback that was to the ISF back in 2009, where they talked about seed as a pathway. And that feedback is that the seed as a pathway is our primary concern. The placement of pathogens in the category of seed-borne and seed-transmitted does not necessarily equate to a certain risk level. There's a range of risk for each category depending on the pathogen and export-import situation. So based on that, we kind of said, well, we can't really use seed-borne, seed-transmitted, which is kind of how it's always been presented in the scientific world, but we had to come up with some designations. And so we came up with these 4 designations, which are, again, standardized between the 2 seed industry databases. Yes, seed as a pathway is pretty, concrete. It's, the seed has been proven through controlled experiments or surveys of seed samples, i.e. routine seed testing, to be a seed-borne or seed-transmitted. So there's really no doubt. Typically, the industry is accepting it, or there's enough data presented that that it's definitely a pathway. No is down on the other end. We couldn't find any evidence that seed was a pathway. through controlled experiments or through surveys. It's never showed up, or just the practical knowledge of seed production. So no was pretty straightforward. Not a host. Got in there because, you know, at least in the PeDS database, you know, once in a while these WTO notices would list a pest, and one of the seed industry members would be concerned about that pest on, say, corn or something. And so we would add corn in there, but, you know, corn is really not a host of that. So we had a way to have a way to kind of say, well, even though it's on the list, this really isn't a host as far as we know. But back in the middle is pathway not proven. That was kind of the more difficult piece we had. And in the beginning, we had 2 or 3 designations for this, but in the long run, we decided just to combine it into pathway not proven. And that's where we've stuck so far. There's really 3 scenarios in the databases where it says pathway not proven. The first one is that, you know, the seed might have been listed or inferred as a pathway for the pathogen, but no data was found to be able to confirm that claim. There are several books, a lot of you know, general plant pathology, vegetable disease books, and where they make those kind of inferences, but, you know, realistically, we could never find any data to confirm that. The second way pathway not proven is that seed may be shown to be infested with the pathogen in laboratory experiments. Those are typically blotter tests or old towel tests, but there was no data presented to confirm the natural infection of seed. So, you know, if we had a situation where they were finding it in a germination test, say, then, you know, we didn't really say that was proven as a natural source of infection. And the third way pathway not proven is in there is if we only have one reference found indicating C may be pathway, but we couldn't find any other references to really corroborate that finding. So anyway, those are the 4 designations we have for seed in the pathway, and that's where we are. What I've noticed though is I have to get back to our programmer for the PeDS database, because I forgot to put these in the definitions and into the information for the PeDS database, but it'll get in there. All right, before I go into a little bit of the demonstration on how the database works, just a few facts about PeDS. Currently, we have 406 pests in the database. 85 of those are bacteria, 198 are fungi, 98 viruses and viroids. There's 2 phytoplasm in there, 1 parasitic plant, and 22 nematodes. Out of those 406 pests, there's 1,263 host pest combinations. And out of those 1,263 combinations, 170 of them are designated as yes, the pathway has been proven, which is about 13.4% of the 1,263 combinations. 196 with pathway not proven, that's about 15.5%. 69 that says not a host, which is about 5.5. So the remaining almost 66% of the seed or the host pest combinations, seed is not a pathway, or there's no evidence that seed is a pathway. So anyway, it's you know, 2/3 of the things that get listed in these WTA notices aren't seed is not a pathway. So barriers for trade with seed really isn't justified in these cases. All right, so one more slide here before I get into the database. Just a reminder, I can't reiterate this enough. It's, you know, the PeDS database is dynamic. It's going to change. There's going to be new information that comes out that needs to be incorporated into the database. And that means it requires feedback to improve it. So please, like I said, we'll show you the page on how you get feedback back to us, but don't hesitate to feedback and let us know other information that may come available. Right now, we're working on still some things in the database. Our goal was over the last 3 or 4 months was to get it ready for public launch. so that took a little bit of time, but we got it going there. I think you'll see it's a very easy to use database. But there's some things we have to improve. Like I said, I have to add the seed pathway definitions. These host pest combinations are supposed to be reviewed on a 3-year review. I probably have about half of those that need to be reviewed right now. We need to establish some sort of review process for them, whether we use the Veg Tech subcommittee or some other experts. We have to establish that, I think, probably in the next year or so. There's some new data I saw from ISF that I need to go back through and harmonize with our database. We're adding flowers and some grass species, like I said, and the update the country listing pest info. The country listing pest info is just you'll see this in the database, and I'll explain it more, but it's what WTO notice we got off, that we got the pathogen off on. That didn't make much sense, but anyway, what's happening now is for some of these pathogens, things like especially the viroids and some of those, is we see that, even though that might have come off, say, the Mexico list at first, is every single one of our countries now have those pests listed. So I have to go through and just kind of add some other stuff. You'll see more of that when I get onto the database. All right. So anyway, when we go, I'm going to go into the database now, and the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of go through the general information, the front page, the about pages. Then we'll do a search by a pest, and then we'll do some searching by crops, and then I'll talk a little bit about the references. This is the front page of the PEDS database, and there's just a little explanation again that really says, what's in the database and why we are doing the database. Kind of that front page, why pest listing is important, what we're trying to do with the pest listing and whatnot. There's a little section down here at the bottom that says how to search. Just a little short explanation of what you can do when you get down here to the search the database part. I'm going to do this in a minute. I want to go over to the About Us page first, because the About Us page is kind of really some of the nuts and bolts. It did a little description again on how the methodology was used to make the database, how we're trying to harmonize them and make sure that the data we have in here is especially harmonized with the ISF regulated pest list database. It has a little bleep about USDA's Phytosanitary export database, and there's a little bit about ASTA and a little bit about me and stuff. So anyway, that's the nuts and bolt pages. I think when we do add the definitions for seeds of the pathway, they'll probably go on this page somewhere. Anyway, you can do the about, and down at the bottom of the about page too, there's still the search the database pieces there. So you can get to that search the database almost in any page. The contact us page, this is the one where, again, when I go back to the importance of feedback, that when you find some information that you think is pertinent to any of the pathogens, any of the host pest combinations, please fill this out and send this over to ASTA, and they'll get it to myself and Rick, and we can analyze the new piece of information. So that's all there. Let me go back into the database. All right, I'll do it from here. This is fine. Okay, so the database is searchable by the pest or by the host. So you can do it either way, and it's it's pretty nice. I mean, you just go in here. I'm gonna type in a tomato. So you get in tomato, you see it starts coming up tomato, and say we want to look up the information for one of our most favorite tomato viruses in the world right now, tomato brown rugose fruit virus. So you can just go down, use the scroll menu, find the virus you want, or the and you can, then you click on the search, and here comes the information about tomato brown rugose fruit virus. This is that first page where I was talking about, that most of this information comes out of databases like CABI, the scientific name of the virus, a common name of the disease typically, where in the databases where it has been reported. In the US, it's when I did this, it was California. I need to look up because I can't remember if it's in Florida now or not. There was a date it was reviewed, which was just a few days ago. What type of pathogen is this, a virus? The countries listed past, that's again, the WTO notices that this virus has been listed on, again, out of the important US markets. So there's probably a lot of other countries. We know there's a lot of other countries that have tomato brown rugose fruit virus listed, but we just haven't put that WT notice into the whole database yet. Host range, tomato pepper, some acronym, and then any kind of information that's pertinent to the virus. So then you keep scrolling down. There's 2 known hosts, so you can click on the hosts, and here's tomato comes up. A seed pathway, yes. Here's the references that we use to verify that seed is a pathway. Scrolling across in the second one this is information about the seed test, seed health testing. There is one, there's ELISA and a bioassay, and there's PCR. Recommended tests are typically the recommended seed health test will be if ASTA has a test method listed, the National Seed Health has one listed, or sometimes there's other ones, but those are kind of the 2 I used most. The International Seed Health Initiative also has sometimes list methods. So that's what so if we have the recommended seed health test, it has to have some sort of validation, some sort of standardization involved. Risk. This is the, is there any other type of mitigation we can do? This, in this case, there is chemical seed disinfections that can be used. And it just comments about it. Again, the viruses or the references I used all the way across. And then if we scroll all the way to the bottom of this tomato page, here's the reference index. So all these codes appear. So here's a TOBRFV-1, and that's the International Seed Federation's regulated pest database. So anyway, they're all in here. Everyone used, it gets listed down here at the bottom of the page. The same goes with pepper. It's the same thing. In the case of pepper, right now there's not enough data that says the pathway has been proven, even though they do find it sometimes with their PCR tests on pepper seed, but really hasn't been shown to be seed transmitted from those finds yet. And just again, information about all of this is right there. So that's using by typing in a pest, you can get in there. Let's say you wanted to just, say you didn't quite know that how to spell the name of a pathogen or something, but you got the first 3 letters. So you can type in like the first 4 letters, and then every single Pseudomonas that's in the database comes up, or there's like bolus. You scroll down there and try to figure out which pathogen you're looking for. So You don't even have to know the whole name of the pathogen. You can find the one you want and then do the same thing. You can come up with the pathogen. Again, then there's the hosts that are involved with this pathogen. So anyway, it's nice to have these drop down menus in here because it's really helped a lot. Say you just want to know what are all the pathogens I should be concerned about on tomato. You just type in tomato. And there's the search results for the tomato. So there's 22 pathogens in the database that that tomato is listed as a host. So then you can go down there and see if you're more interested in one over the other, or you want to know if say tomato spotted wilt, what's tomato spotted wilt in the tomato. So there's 17 hosts on here. When you click on tomato spotted wilt, everything comes up. We wanted it on tomato, right? That's what we said. So you can see tomato spotted wilt isn't a seed-borne pathogen in tomato, so you can get that kind of information out of there. Anyway, so I see a spelling error in here, but I have to try to correct that, but I haven't been able to correct it yet. So really that's about it, and that's how you use the database. I see a whole bunch of questions coming up here and there.
Thanks, Darrell. I think we're going to have to move on to the next person just to keep this thing going and then do the Q&A at the end. So I will turn it over to Rick, and I think all of the panelists should now be able to use their videos because I figured that out.
Okay, thank you, Darrell. Greatly appreciate this. And again, when we get to Rose's presentation, we can focus a little bit more on, the linkage between the two databases, because I think the main issue is that, we're trying to eliminate any redundancies that may occur. And the pests that are on the ASTA database are pests where we've had issues with trade or rejected shipments or WTO notifications. And the ISF regulated list is commodity centric. So they've got more comprehensive lists on 14 different vegetable seed species, and of which some of those pests are in the ASTA database, but the sources of information are basically the same for those particular pests. And where ISF has already worked up data on a particular pest, it's referenced in this one here. So we'll get to that a little later. So with that, let's move on to